Hey guys, and welcome to the Working Money channel. So I know I've been talking a lot about this interview, the Recode Decode interview with Brad Garlinghouse. And so you can find it here on this website. It's a Vox interview with Kara Swisher, and so she has Brad Garlinghouse on the podcast. It's an hour long. Guys, I'm just going to synopsize some of the points for those of you. I know I've mentioned you guys should probably listen to the interview. It is an hour. I'm just going to synopsize some of the points for you guys because I did think some of it was actually pretty interesting. So some of it we already know. Brad moved to Silicon Valley in 1997, and Kara goes through some of Brad Garlinghouse's history at some startup companies in Silicon Valley and the fact that he worked at Yahoo. You know, a lot of stuff that we already know about Mr. Garlinghouse. One of the most surprising pieces of the interview was just this little tidbit. It had nothing to really do with Ripple per se, but the funny thing was Brad was about to actually join Uber instead. And so when he got the call from a headhunter to be recruited as Ripple's COO, he was actually driving for Uber. And I mean, okay, this guy's resume is quite remarkable with regards to Silicon Valley and the tech companies involved with that, but he wanted to drive Uber just to kind of get a sense of what it was to be part of Uber. Now, let's not forget, this was right at the beginning, okay? So Uber was brand new, and so for Brad, it was this novelty thing, and so he was driving around in an Uber. He said he did it for about a month, and he got a call from a recruiter to be the COO of Ripple, and he had never heard of the company before, so he waved off the offer, but Chris Larson really wanted to hire him. He wanted to hire somebody from outside of the system, meaning outside the financial system. So Brad Garlinghouse eventually met with Chris Larson. Chris explained to him what Ripple was all about, and Brad thought, well, you know, you might be onto something here. Brad does mention to Kara in the interview that he is invested in Bitcoin. He has been for a while. He's long Bitcoin. Obviously has this sense that Bitcoin is going to sky high. This is just my opinion, by the way, that Bitcoin is going to rise even higher than what we've seen right now. So Brad's invested long in Bitcoin. That is information we already knew. And at this point in time when he joined Ripple, the idea of crypto was still, very highly anti-government, anti-banks. But as we know, Ripple's whole MO, their whole raison d'etre was to be able to do this legitimately. They wanted to move away from that whole idea that cryptocurrency was for scoundrels and thugs and criminals and all that jazz. And their whole thing from the beginning was to be able to partner with the institutions, partner with the banks, and create what we know now as the Internet of Value. Why can't we send money the same way we send information immediately? And Brad Garlinghouse really does hit this point home of using the technology for real-world utility and not just speculation. So what they're doing is they want to try to rewire, fundamentally, the infrastructure of the world system using blockchain and cryptocurrency. And this is what he's trying to explain to Kara Swisher, okay? It's a whole new concept. It's a whole new system. Ripple is going out there and trying to make it happen. So Ripple has always taken on the point of view that they want to work within the system. And so there's controversies, obviously, within the cryptocurrency community. You know, right at the beginning, we had these techno-anarchist types, right? These people who are very pro-Bitcoin and down with the system, down with the government. And so that's one facet of this that Ripple just kind of wanted to shake off. They didn't want to be associated with that because obviously governments and banks aren't going to want to do business with people who believe in that ideology. And so this is the biggest challenge. It's actually those people in the community, the Bitcoin maximalists, so to speak, that are hindering the real world adoption because it's that kind of thinking, it's that kind of archetype, that stereotypical techno-anarchists that banks and financial institutions do not want to have anything to do with. Just an aside as Working Money Channel, I'm having a feeling that these are probably the same types of people who are trolling the channel sometimes. Anyway, just an aside, Brad also mentions that ICOs are a scam, okay? So he wanted to point out that ICOs are something that kind of came about in 2017 during the last crypto craze we saw in the bull market, and that they are ultimately a scam. He also said that he was one of the original ones to come out and say they were a scam, and that the end of ICOs will really benefit a maturing crypto market. Okay, and then they get into cross-border transfers and the term wiring money. And ultimately, Brad makes a little joke about how the term wiring money is actually derived from the telegraph and wiring, how you used to wire money in the 1800s, old school Western Union style, right? So why can't we transfer money quicker in the internet age? And so they talk about the system currently, how it's clunky, it's a broken system, and there's an opportunity right now to use modern technology to solve this problem. So Brad talks about correspondent banking, as we know, and how since not every bank has relationships with other banks right now, banks have to, what they do is they daisy chain accounts using pre-funded accounts, nostro vostro, right? And it takes time and it's inefficient. Not only that, the global error rate is 6%. And he brings up an interesting point. If you were to do a Google search and 6% of the time it just didn't work, Google just didn't work, you would not be happy with Google. You probably wouldn't be using Google if 6% of the time it didn't work. Okay, so why are we at the mercy of this old system? So he goes on to talk about how we went from, the idea of crypto being associated with the Silk Road and illicit activity to speculation, which is progress. So, we've moved from the Silk Road to speculation. That's a step in the right direction. It's not where we ultimately want to be, but it is a step in the right direction. And now where we are is we're going from speculation to real world utility. He also mentions, and I thought that this was really interesting, that Ripple seems to be the only one in the industry right now, on the scale that they're working at, implementing blockchain and cryptocurrency in real world use cases. Okay, it's a small scale, but they are the biggest in terms of companies doing this in comparison to their competitors. Kara Swisher asked about the speculation and why, we saw markets going up and going down, right, in 2018. Brad Garlinghouse ultimately mentions that, everybody wants to get rich quick. It's a pursuit of quick money, and people have been weeded out since 2018. So guys, if you're still in the market in 2019, you are going to be some of the early adopters. 2018, obviously we had a huge bear market for over a year, and it weeded a lot of people out, and Brad talks about that. So in a healthy market, where, right now we're still at 2,000 plus crypto tokens, he says that 99% of those tokens will not exist, and only the ones with real use cases will survive. He talks a little bit about the XRP ledger and how that's how Ripple manages their liquidity for financial institutions using XRP as a bridge currency. They also touched on the topic of one world currency, and I know some of you guys are really interested in that concept with regards to XRP. Brad seems to think that, regular traditional fiat currencies work very, very well in a lot of cases, like in the United States, where the dollar is quite stable. You can go to Starbucks, for example, use the American dollar, and this is the case for a lot of countries. There are some countries where they are prone to hyperinflation, like Venezuela, in which case using Bitcoin and XRP in a country like that would be probably better. But ultimately, we're still going to have fiat currencies. And he says stable currencies like the US dollar work here. And he doesn't see any one cryptocurrency becoming one world currency. Now, I know what you guys are going to say. Oh, but XRP could be that currency in one day. And yeah, guys, it could be. But listen to what he's saying. The fact that fiats are stable make them good for everyday use in terms of buying goods and services. What does that implicitly mean? Okay, what did I tell you before? Brad Garlinghouse is long Bitcoin, and I could only imagine that what he thinks is that Bitcoin will rise, and what I also believe is that he thinks the price of XRP will rise as well. This is just Working Money Channel's opinion, okay, because of supply, demand, what Ripple is doing within the ecosystem, and I have a feeling that this is why he says, fiat currencies are good for buying goods and services. Let's not jump ahead here. What Brad does believe, though, is that every cryptocurrency with a purpose, with utility, will hold value, i.e. XRP. And so just as I said before, XRP's value will derive from supply and demand and the liquidity that Ripple will build across the world once these cross-border transactions, once the cryptocurrency regulations come to pass globally. Brad talks about the unbanked and the underbanked with regards to cross-border remittances and how a lot of these transactions for a lot of people around the world are cost prohibitive, and that bringing more people into the system will actually allow for these transactions to become less and less so that the cost for sending money will ultimately be negligible. And then he uses an example which I thought was kind of interesting. Remember when we used to send texts like 10 years ago, 10 plus 12 years ago? It used to actually cost money to send text messages, like 25 cents a text. And now that there are so many people on a network where texts are just flying more than phone calls, arguably, we don't even think. There is a cost associated with sending texts, but since so many people are doing it, our cell phone providers have actually buried that cost so we can send unlimited text and it doesn't actually cost us anything. Well, Brad has this idea that the same thing will happen with regards to cross-border remittance payments. Part of what he talked about was how 2018 was a year where he flew around the world to educate people, to get people to understand, to get these banks, financial institutions, governments to really get the concept of what Ripple was doing and how they should not associate it with the Silk Road and illicit activity anymore. He said he got a lot of positive reception from banks and that 2018, despite the bear market, was a very good year for Ripple, as we know. One of the most interesting things that I heard from this interview was the fact that, a lot of these banks are making money off other banks. So, for example, Citibank is a tier 1 bank, and they make money off, let's say, Wells Fargo, which is a tier 2 bank. He uses those as an example. And so many banks love the idea of democratizing this cross-border payment system, not needing a tier 1 bank anymore to complete these transactions. So big companies are in a dilemma. How much market share are you willing to lose by not adopting quick enough? And some money center banks, so like tier 1 banks, are leaning into the technology because they realize this is the way the tech is moving, whereas some other banks, and I think he mentioned Citibank, and Brad really realizes that, the biggest banks are probably going to be the last on board, but what the tier 2, tier 3 banks love is that it democratizes these payments, and so they are not going to be at the mercy of tier 1 banks anymore. He says when talking to these regulators, obviously anonymous transactions won't fly, and that they want to change the system by working with the system, and that we can allow economies around the world to compete by democratizing cross-border payments worldwide. He says that banks already have customers, and if you want to have an internet of value, you have to connect the repositories of value, and those are the banks. They don't want to create a whole new system. They want to complement the system for this whole thing to happen faster than it otherwise would. So ultimately, Brad says, let's focus on the substance, not the hype. Are you solving a real world problem, or is it just catnip for an investor? I just wanted to finish this off with the fact that he says he holds Bitcoin and XRP, and he says that's basically it. Brad Garlinghouse does not hold any other cryptocurrencies, people. That was ultimately the interview, guys. The link is in the description, but that's ultimately the recap for you guys today. I want to hear what you guys think. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like the video if you like the content I'm providing. I always love hearing your comments. See you in the next one, guys.